afternoon, everyone. I'm Liz Cohen. I'm Dean at the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and I am delighted that you have joined us for the annual Julia S. Phelps Lecture in the Arts and Humanities. In past years, we have welcomed such creative artists as ZZ Packer, novelist Margot Livesey, and Tony Award-winning director John Tiffany. This year, our topic is dance. Our lecture is entitled Naked Body Language, Dance is Time and Gesture is Meaningless, and it will be delivered by our current Radcliffe Fellow, choreographer Carol Armitage. The Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study is dedicated to inquiry that transcends disciplinary boundaries. We make particular efforts to incorporate the visual and the performing arts with other modes of inquiry. So at Radcliffe, we are frequently beginning our conferences with an artistic performance as our first encounter with a critical social or political topic, such as Arab Spring, immigration, or violence. And art exhibitions often weave art with other disciplines. Our inaugural exhibition in the new Johnson Koulakundis Family Gallery in Byerly Hall, which is right around our yard, is an immersive media experience produced by the Japanese Collaborative Team Lab, made up of 400 Japanese artists, engineers, and computer scientists. I hope you will visit this wonderful exhibition. It's called What a Loving and Beautiful World, sometime before November 14th. During the gallery's hours of 12 to 5, Monday through Saturday. Likewise, our Schlesinger Library is bringing art together with history in a fascinating current exhibition drawn from the personal papers and possessions of the artist Corita Kent. That exhibit will be up until December 6th. We integrate the arts with other topics for how they engage us at a visceral level and take us to new imaginative spaces. And in those spaces, the arts help us to see the world differently and to find the vision to remake it. The Radcliffe Institute is also committed to sharing the fruits of advanced study with a broad public audience through occasions like today. The calendar cards on your chairs list upcoming events, and I hope you will join us for as many of them as you possibly can, including a poetry reading on Monday, November 16th, with Lucy Tapahanzo, the Poet Laureate of the Navajo Nation. Tapahanzo's poetry reading is part of our year-long programming on the theme of Native and Indigenous peoples. We'll be exploring this theme through several arts events, as well as through lectures and seminars. On November 19th, we'll be treated to a dramatic reading of a powerful play about violence against Native women, and it's called Sliver of a Full Moon by Mary Catherine Nagel, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. On April 28th, an exhibit by photographer Matika Wilbur of the Swinomish and Tulalip tribes of Washington State will open in the Johnson Koulakundis Family Gallery. And the next day, on April 29th, I know this is far off, but you might mark it down, we will hold a conference entitled Native Peoples, Native Politics. In fact, some of the work that Carol Armitage will be doing while she is here with us as a fellow contributes to the Native and Indigenous peoples theme. She is developing dance related to the Australian Aboriginal culture, and she has recently become interested in the Central Plains of the United States, and she's beginning to learn about the Native peoples of that region and hopes to incorporate that learning into new choreography. But this afternoon, Carol is delivering the Phelps Lecture. The Phelps Lecture honors Julia Phelps, Radcliffe alumna, art historian, curator, and devoted teacher for decades. We are very grateful to Julia's family, to her friends, and her students who established this yearly lecture in memory of her passion for sharing her love of art. Carol Armitage, this year's Mildred Londa Weissman Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute, communicates through the vocabulary and the grammar of movement rather than words. She trained as a classical ballerina, and she danced in companies throughout Europe before founding Armitage Gone Dance in New York in 2004. Her work blends ballet with other genres of dance and it transcends other kinds of boundaries too. She has choreographed dance pieces about subjects ranging from costume design to particle physics. And recently, she collaborated with biologists to create a dance called On the Nature of Things, a performance about climate change at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. You can read more about Carol's accomplishments on the cards placed on your chairs. What makes tonight doubly special is that not only will we hear Carol's own insights into how dance makes meaning, but she will also engage in conversation with a local colleague, Richard Colton. Richard is the co-founder and the director of Summer Stages Dance, a dance company located in Concord, Massachusetts, and at the Institute of Contemporary Art in Boston. Richard's impressive professional biography can also be found on the card. After their dialogue, we will open up the floor to you for questions. I then invite you to keep up the conversation by joining us for a reception downstairs in this building right after the lecture. Armitage and Colton are both artists for whom movement is a medium of artistic expression. Whereas painters depict with line and pigment, and composers craft with sound, choreographers create with the human form. As Armitage has put it, and I quote her, "Dance is the poetic language of the body," end quote. I suspect that for many of us here today, dance is not our first language. For me, as a writer of history, for example, words comprise my native tongue. But just as learning a second language can light up new neural pathways in our brains, so encountering the language of dance can teach us new ways of discovering and communicating meaning that go beyond the verbal. So I think an afternoon of learning through sound, movement, and image awaits us, and I know that we are in for a treat. So please join me in welcoming Carol Armitage.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Liz, for the marvelous introduction. It makes all the struggle feel worthwhile. You know, it's such a great privilege to be here at the Radcliffe, as we now call it. And I must say, if I had known how great the food was, I would have applied just for that reason. I'm delighted to talk to this distinguished audience on a subject dear to my heart. How does dance make meaning? And I have to begin with the way that we are taught as dancers, very literally. We have been told, at least we women, to be seen and not heard. So I'm very happy to have this chance to be heard. I want to talk about how meaning is created in dance because over the years I've seen how often people feel intimidated, like they don't understand some kind of secret code, because it is not literary and it is not a form that uses story. And I want to talk about theatrical dance, concert dance, not participatory dance, which is a different endeavor. But I believe that dance, like all of the arts, is a philosophic practice. It is preoccupied with ways that we are organized and the possibility of reorganizing ourselves. Everything a human being does is in some fundamental way an organized activity, and therefore the revealing of pattern gives insight and satisfaction. By setting up a pattern in time and seeing it change and mutate and get disrupted, our expectations are thwarted and we start to feel or see or gain insight from this unfolding of pattern. I mean, maybe it's easy to think of Bach, who creates a melody and you hear it repeated, but there's a slight variation or a change of accent, and then suddenly there's a tonal harmonic change and a whole new kind of world of feeling or insight sort of opens up. And dance does the same thing. This molecular unfolding of pattern gives us insight. Meaning is also created through body language. It's one of the tools we use to map our way through the unknown. Martha Graham famously said, I'm not supposed to be using this mic, that the body never lies. So reading body language is absolutely natural to us. We have mirror neurons in our brain, and this gives us the ability of empathy. We look at a person, we know if they're happy, sad, aggressive, and this is so natural that when we look at dancers on stage, it's almost impossible not to read meaning, so that making abstract dance is practically impossible. And dancers do sometimes use a natural gesture to create a moment of meaning, but it's not really where the action is. It's this sense of organization and pattern and processes unfolding that allows us to gain insight. Choreography fashions representations of ourselves as dancers to make clear what is poorly understood or hidden. And this is done through the articulation of time in 3 dimensions. But the dancers are standing in for you. They are people. You are people, and you are looking at them acting. And this is the way to think about it, not as characters, just as we're all people. Now, the articulation of time maybe is easy to understand if you think about tap dance, because that really is, you can hear it, and you see the brilliant display of virtuoso parsing of time. It's exciting, it's exuberant. It doesn't need a story. A story would even get in the way. So let's just look at a bit of tap dance to remember what it is. So dance is motion, and it is always slipping away, just like life, evaporating as it takes place. So consciousness is a mystery, but it involves the simultaneity of many mental activities going on: noticing, analyzing, feeling, observing, calculating. And so one of the things that I try to do is to make movement that looks as spontaneous and improvised as possible, because in this way we kind of get inside the mental activity of the dancer, and you see them being subjective and objective at the same time, expressing and interacting with each other. So you get a kind of inside picture of something about this feeling of consciousness. Balanchine, who is, the great choreographer that I call the Shakespeare of dance, because he did histories and comedies and not really tragedies, existential pieces, romances. In other words, he created a very broad portrait of what it is to be human. And he would say, because he was confronted by this same question all the time, like, I don't understand dance, what does it mean? He would say, when you have a garden full of pretty flowers, you don't demand of them, what do you mean? What is your significance? Dancers are just like flowers, and flowers grow without any literal meaning. They are just beautiful. There is a genre that is called story ballets. These are kind of the classical repertoire, but they turn a lot of people off, I think, including me, at least the story side, because the truth of the matter is when you look at the stage, you have no idea who the mother-in-law is. I mean, things that cannot be stated in or expressed in dance terms aren't really how dance creates meaning. But something like Swan Lake, that we probably all know, it maybe is the quintessential ballet that everyone recognizes, which was created in 1877, is quite interesting because it has two choreographers. Actually, it premiered and was a dismal failure, and Tchaikovsky died thinking it had been a disaster. I mean, it was a disaster in his lifetime. But then the Bolshoi, for some reason don't remember, decided to revive it. And they called upon Petipa, the French choreographer who made his entire career in Russia, to make this new version of Swan Lake. And he was old and ill, so he asked Lev Ivanov to do Acts 2 and 4, and he choreographed Acts 1 and 3. And what's quite interesting about this is they have very different sort of choreographic styles, signatures, ways of creating movement. I mean, just like you see Picasso's brushwork and it's different from Cézanne's, you can see very distinctly in the use of time and the kind of steps that they made that they are two different minds at work. Petipa was quite a dazzling, diamantine, brilliant, exuberant sort of dance maker, knitting together complex weavings of steps. So we'll look at a short excerpt from Sleeping Beauty, also to Tchaikovsky, because it really encapsulates his style very well. Then Ivanov, who choreographed the second and fourth movements, what we call the white ballets, because they are more kind of dreamy and pure dance. And these are actually the scenes that we remember and that really embody dance. It's not the narrative part. I don't even know why that story ballet term exists, but it does. But he used kind of repetition and this dreamy, almost trance-like way of creating a sensorial, immersive kind of feeling. And there's great delineation of time, architecture of time. It has a lot of vitality, but there's just such a different way of feeling the movement that you go into this more dreamlike state. Theatrical dance began when Catherine de' Medici introduced the courtly pageantry of Florence to France upon her marriage to King Henry II in 1533. And I'm drawing a lot upon Jennifer Homan's great book of dance history for these bons mots. These lavish entertainments with allegorical themes were used as a political tool to soothe passions and calm sectarian violence. She also shrewdly understood how the performing arts could be used to convey the wealth and culture of the state. Her son, Charles IX, established the Académie de Poésie et de la Musique in 1570 with a group of Neoplatonic poets, including Ronsard, who believed that hidden beneath the shattered and chaotic surface of political life lay a divine harmony and order, a web of rational and mathematical relations demonstrating the natural laws of the universe and the mystical powers of God. The body was seen as pulling man down toward the beasts, but you could break that tie through dance and raise yourself upward like an angel. Louis XIV is the person who laid down the foundation of classical ballet technique as we know it today. He was passionately devoted to dance, practiced and rehearsed for many hours a day, at least while he was young, though he certainly used dance to cover up a lot of his political maneuvers, dance and etiquette and clothes and all of this, so that he could get away with lots of things. But dance had been long seen as one of the three principal exercises of the nobility, along with bearing arms and riding. Thus, it was an adjunct military art, a peacetime discipline akin to fencing and equestrianism. Louis XIV established the Royal Academy of Dance in 1661 and shifted the emphasis away from the military and toward court etiquette. And I think it's really interesting to think about the street dance form known as voguing, because like ballet, it is also an adjunct military art. It has a strict vocabulary governed by very precise rules for execution. It has a complex set of named steps that can be combined in many different orders and varieties to create what are like sentences, phrases of dance. It has a virtuoso idea of the body as being something that can be very extreme, capable of great virtuosity. And it has this peacetime function, because voguing was developed as a kind of battle form in the ghetto, where you would fight, through dance rather than with weapons, and you would win esteem through the greatness of your style and the brilliance of your movement. In other words, instead of using arms, you use your arms. The French Enlightenment led to the belief that a ballet could reveal human truths with a moral force that words simply could not convey. And this ultimately led to the modern ballerina with point shoes, in a tutu and wearing point shoes. And I think it's really interesting that, again, I was always taught that the reason that there were point shoes was because it was creating this ethereal, spirit-like image, and that it came through these choreographic ideas of ballet. But recently learned that quite the contrary, in a very populist form of a kind of vaudeville, a kind of commedia dell'arte Italian theater circuit, there was a woman named Amalia Brugnoli who strengthened her feet and rose up on her toes, and people so much loved it that it was a trick that stuck. And it's really interesting because in ballet, people are so worried about the purity and it being polluted, and things that coming from this kind of populist form shouldn't be integrated into it. But of course, the history of art is nothing but these kind of cross-pollinations and pollutions and borrowings and metamorphoses. Agon. Actually, before we get to Agon, I'll just mention briefly Giselle, because that was really kind of the first truly classical ballet in 1841. And this was this world of enchantment, tinged with longing for an intoxicating, sweet oblivion. Very much an art of women, devoted to the world of inner dreams and the imagination. As Théophile Gautier put it, who wrote so many texts on dance, the real, unique, and eternal theme for ballet is the dance itself. It has nothing to do with expressing human motives or inner dilemmas, because ballets like Giselle don't have real characters. The characters are cardboard. There's no moral dilemma. So dances reveal the concealed in the form of these visual poems or living dreams. Now, Agon, which is the seminal ballet of the 20th century, a collaboration between Stravinsky and Balanchine that premiered in 1957, addresses this entire history of theatrical dance that I've just kind of outlined. Ostensibly, the subject matter was, agon, conflict. But really, it's joined with French Baroque etiquette and music, and dance forms, in order to be a manifesto. I mean, it is really Balanchine and Stravinsky's agon with the public to win over the idea that the classical is the one eternal thing in the temporal world. And this was the first time that Stravinsky ever used dodecaphonic music, the 12-tone row. And Balanchine met the challenge with very ferocious, intense, perilous movement that has hints of sexual dysfunction and of a world slightly out of joint, very much a 20th century expression, but with these roots that are absolutely at the beginning of the pageantry and history of sense of order that ballet used. And Balanchine took away costumes. It was done in practice clothes, tights and leotards. And I'm going to show the coda to the first trio because that is where Stravinsky, for the first time ever, used this dodecaphonic sound. I mean, there are a lot of, sometimes the women dance in very delicate sort of ways as traditional, but then there are other places where it's really gender reversals are occurring and the women are incredibly ferocious. So it goes back and forth. It's, polymorphously perverse. Oh, there's my point shoe. Forgot that. Another notable thing about Agon that I'll just briefly comment on, it had probably the most erotic duet ever created, and it was for an African-American man and a white woman, and he used the color of the skin very distinctly, and it's very much about two people with equally powerful wills, working together and pulling and pushing. Fascinating. And, I think, if you look at the way that Agon draws upon the history of ballet, you could look at tap dance the same way if you go back to the roots of African dance, the long history of metamorphosis. I mean, they operate the same way through time and sort of becoming different as these different influences come together. Of course, Stravinsky and Balanchine loved tap dance and jazz and kind of the African-American experience and drew very much upon this for a lot of their ideas and rhythms, and it was very present in almost all the work they did separately and together. But dance cemented its real liberation in the 50s when, after getting rid of stories and getting rid of costumes, Merce Cunningham said there's no need to dance to music. The internal rhythm of the body itself can be the generator of the motion, the motor drive of movement. And he worked with John Cage, and they were very much inspired by chance operations so that things would come together without intentionality. So that on stage, you would hear the music for the first time when you were performing. because when you rehearse, you always do it in silence. And you would see the costume and the set for the first time. So their idea, influenced very much by Zen philosophy, was that this was a more real way of understanding or seeing the world, because just like as you walk down the street and you see a bird flying by, you hear a car horn honk, that this kind of haphazard and coincidental way of seeing the universe was actually a better picture of the universe, or the one that they believed in and wanted to propose as a philosophical way of looking at the world. And I danced with Cunningham, and here is a short excerpt that I'm actually in this. This was made for film. Voila. Just one step further in sort of dance history, the Judson Church movement, Yvonne Rainer, like Cunningham, really worked to make movement as something of an object to be examined without psychological or social motives. And they opted for neutrality in the dance. And Yvonne Rainer herself famously wrote in 1964 the No Manifesto. Bits of it are no to spectacle, no to virtuosity, no to transformations, no to make-believe, no to glamour, no to moving or being moved, etc. So this was kind of the world that I grew up in the 70s. And I felt it was very cold and very puritanical and very self-righteous. And there was no place for eroticism. And I just felt like it was poor, and that we had won our liberation in dance, and that we could combine the poetry, refinement, virtuosity of ballet with the intellectual curiosity and democratic intentions of modern dance. And then, since it was the 70s, why not some punk rawness to just give it some extra attention? And so this is what I did, very controversial, but it led to me being called the punk ballerina. And there I am. So I haven't really talked a lot about the difference between ballet and modern dance, even though there's some differences. But for me, they're fundamentally the same thing in that they are both expressing philosophical questions, using forms of organization on the stage in order to make meaning through time and space. So, they are actually engaged in the exact same thing. But I think one of the issues is people don't really see ballet. They think of it as a style or an aesthetic. They think of it as Giselle or Swan Lake. But to me, ballet is actually a science of motion, and a very brilliant science that really gives you the tools to use your body, to control your body, to have freedom to do what you want. And again, this combining of these different influences is often seen to be polluting, but to me, that is the job of a contemporary artist, is to try to reveal meaning about our times today, and to put forth ideas for people to confront or dispute. And one of the ways that I've really been trying to create new processes, new forms of organization, new vocabularies of dance is to draw upon ideas from science. I created a dance called Three Theories that was based on Brian Greene's book, The Elegant Universe. And for me, the subject had a very direct kind of very simple philosophical imagery in it. Einstein said that with relativity, that there are great warping forces in the universe, but it is fundamentally harmonious and predictable. Then quantum came along and said the exact opposite. It is a roiling, frenetic, chaotic, absolutely unknowable place of beyond unpredictability. It is so full of disruption. And then string theory, which is a hypothesis, not a real theory, but it posits that order and disorder are both needed to kind of create a balance in these asymmetrical forces that we are in the midst of. So all of these, to me, sounded like wonderful images to use to ask these kinds of questions. Is the world harmonious, or is it predictable? Is it not? So here's a short excerpt from the quantum section. Extreme movement, disruptions, light coming on and off, unpredictable, volatile. Music by Rhys Chatham, 100 electric guitars and drums. In the relativity section, Einstein said that gravity is the warping of space-time fabric. So I decided to use warping, twisting, movement as the basis for creating that. And it uses classical Carnatic music from southern India. And again, fundamentally predictable. So in my exploration of funkiness in classical tradition's collision with democracy, I really conceive of the stage as a field. So rather than highlighting one visual focal point or one more important person, the whole stage has simultaneous actions going on at the same time. And this allows for multiple perspectives. And in fact, to create movement for groups, rather than everyone moving together in unison, which maybe comes from the military antecedents of dance, I draw upon nature, like an image such as the flock of birds who fly together. They have the same intention, but they're not flapping their wings at the same time. So I've developed what I call cubism in motion, because I have the dancers face all different directions. So you can see the same phrase from all angles, or many angles. And they're together, but they're not exactly rigidly together. And they might do a movement such as an arabesque, which the leg is up behind you. But rather than doing it all as that classical kind of arabesque, it might be twisted, high, low, in the air, on the floor. Someone upside down. So you're really seeing theme and variation at the same time. So I'm going to show a little bit from string theory. It kind of has this And it's great music by John Luther Adams. And another tool I've been using to invent new dance vocabularies is, what is the impetus of a movement? So it's not just taking a shape, but you might, hit something, and that trajectory of that force takes your body to a new place. And that force, dancers are always making mental diagrams of geometry as they're dancing in order to control the articulation of what you're doing. So that force can go over and hit another dancer who is then moved to a different position. So you can actually do it literally or more mentally, but it just brings kind of trajectories and paths of energy. And kind of in a similar way, I've been using fractal geometry. That's, the geometry of clouds, mountains, seashores, the geometry of nature to create a curvilinear, sinuous vocabulary. And this really, you see the path in both of these as more important than the actual position. So again, there's a kind of philosophical difference. It is more about the fluidity, the path, than the material the material positions. So you'll see in this clip, you'll see a little of both, actually. Both fractals and hitting to engage movement. Kind of classical Japanese aesthetics have been very important to me. The idea of drawing from nature, asymmetry, negative space. But in order to combat kind of what could be too dreamy a lyricism, I will add these very contradictory kinds of things like raw, percussive, visceral accents, again, from punk ideas or tribal. I think just the idea of very contradictory things being brought together really makes interesting work. And it's really when you're in the middle that it's not that interesting. So I hope with this, I've been able to lead you to see how the philosophical impulse is expressed, across geographic, political, and temporal boundaries to paint pictures of the world in time and space, the way that dance creates meaning. Thank you.
Wow.
Well, welcome to Richard Colton.
Carol. It's great that Carol is here, and thank you, Radcliffe, for bringing her here. I do want to take just a brief moment to explain. Is there a way to turn up the, make this a different,
like
lights
we don't have any
and
more
a little
video,
more,
so we
and
can see
those a
people.
little, quieter,
these are blinding
if it's
us, but
possible.
it's, you know,
I
it's
wanted
like I'm
to
being
just
on
take,
stage, Richard.
I wanted to just take a brief moment to say why I'm up here. And just as you're having the privilege to hear Carol today, I've had that privilege, and for about 35 years. And it was an amazing time when I first met Carol in the late 70s. And we were both in different companies, and Carol was beginning to do her own work. And I think we were both very busy. We, in fact, weren't friends, but we would see each other at different concerts, and then she began seeing me at her concerts. Whenever we ran into the street together, we'd start a conversation that somehow couldn't end, and sometimes we'd take a detour and sit down in a cafe. But it's been a long history of that kind of speaking, and it's been absolutely inspiring. She was the one who introduced me to Guy Debord and Deleuze, and she knew all of this way before I did, and she also went to Europe early in her career when a lot of American dancers were struggling and staying here. Carol saw a certain light and went to Europe and brought back all kinds of incredible information and excitement to us. But in any case, it's been an amazing time, and I was delighted to hear. I did ask, well, should this sound like one of our conversations between First Avenue and 14th Street and over to 7th Avenue? It will be a little like that, which had a certain amount of stream of consciousness, and we would jump. But in fact, there is a little structure here, and I think it's going to end in a Q&A as soon as we see your heads nodding. I wanted to talk a little bit about, with Carol, her early collaborations. Those were the moments I met her, and I was amazed. She was a dancer in the Cunningham Company at the time, and she remained in the Cunningham Company for a few years and kept doing her work, and she had the most amazing collaborators. Her first piece was actually in a gym, and I know Harvard has a great program coming up, Gym Dances, so I thought, what a wonderful convergence here. Very first work in a gym and in a collaboration with Christian Marclay and his work, if some of you remember at the MFA, The Clock, an incredible visual and also sound artist. And I was just wondering, to begin with Christian Marclay, to begin in the gym, tell us a little about that and about, Carol has this incredible curiosity that her dances emerge from, and I know there's going to be an incredible backstory to this.
There is. There's a good backstory. Well, again, this was the punk era. I was going, to all the punk clubs. When you're that age, 20 or whatever, you don't need to sleep. And somehow, I'd be up dancing all night, and then I'd sleep a tiny bit and then go dance with Merce all day and then choreograph in the early evening. I don't know how it was possible, but that's what was going on. So I found this group called The. There's a new group, The. This was the original The. And they played the loudest music of anyone. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to do a dance that just every once in a while there's literally like this violent wall of sound that just randomly gets played. And I wanted to do something that was just about destroying all those years of working so hard to create technique, like just melting the dance into nothing, going down to tabla rasa. So I just, Jasper Johns had done that the paintings, he called them melted Picassos. I just think I want to melt the dance technique. And so I called it Ne, which, from France, ne pas, it's kind of like no, was sort of the meaning of it. And we were originally going to perform in a squat on the Lower East Side. And this was a building that had no heat. And it was very atmospheric, and I was all excited. And so I thought, well, we need really warm clothes, because we were going to perform in February. So Christian Marclay, who I met when he was a student at Mass College of Art, I can't even remember how oh yes, because I've been living in Switzerland, he's Swiss, so that's how I know him. And so he said, let's use these fake fur, these long fake fur pants in, these bright, incredibly bright colors. So mine were pink and yellow, someone else's, blue and green. And so we had these really, really heavy pants that made you look like you weighed an extra 100 pounds. And then we were supposed to perform. And the squatters, I think all of a sudden, they kind of woke up and they went, we're illegal. How is it that we're bringing an audience into this place? And they suddenly banned the performance. So then I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I found a high school gym, St. Francis Xavier High School gym on 17th Street. And so we performed there, and Christian Markley brought all these fluorescent lights that were kind of laying around as a kind of environment, and then the played these barrages of sound, and we destroyed movement.
Well, I think it was James Baldwin who said artists should disturb the peace. So it sounds like it had that element of wanting to disturb the peace, the sense of safety.
It was the joyous jubilation of it. I mean, a lot of it is just, it's like our generation's turn. I mean, it was there was a lot of humor in my mind about it too. I wasn't, I didn't want to be so deadly serious. It was very serious in one way, but it was also not taking ourselves seriously.
I remember the first piece that I saw of yours was called Paradise. And speaking of not only not taking oneself serious, but it had such a different tone than anything I had seen in New York, and a kind of exotic gorgeousness and a kind of joy. You're talking about the joy. And also a lot of the work of the time with Charles Atlas, whose films were just recently shown at the Harvard Museum. What about it seemed like he was an artist you worked with for about 5 or 6 years. What these kindred spirits? Where did you meet Atlas and why?
Atlas was on staff at Cunningham as a filmmaker, and this little excerpt of Cunningham was one of the films he made. They were very elaborate because we had to duck under cables, and there were like 20 steady cams. It was excruciating, actually, because it took hours and hours and didn't ever quite work, and you had to do it over and over and all that. But he had a side that was not expressed at all in the Cunningham work. This very, the cool, 50s cool, and this hotter way that I was making dance, and very much, I think it was very connected to gay liberation, and we were all kind of part of the ferment of that movement and kind of this other perspective. We didn't talk about that, but that I realized was very much a part of it. And his taste was more camp and kitsch than mine, but there was a feeling, the spirit of celebrating life rather than sort of repressing it that was very dominant. And he brought really interesting, witty visual ideas to the work we did together, including this one piece called the Watteau Duets, which was a series of 6 duets with another Cunningham dancer, and I were partners, and it started with sort of getting to know each other, and then attraction, and then romance, and then eroticism, then dysfunctionality, and then just turning into performance art. So this kind of journey. And this was Charlie Atlas's boyfriend. And so he said, let's put him in a leather skirt, and let's put you in the pants. And I was like, sure. So it was the first time, I think, really the first time that a man was on stage with a skirt. So we were playing with all of those things before anyone talked about these issues. I mean, it was just who we were and how we were, living in the world. And, always, again, all these things had become, I left for Europe in 1990, and I came back in 2005, and the country had changed so much. When I left, no one was talking about gender, and no one was talking about all these multicultural issues. And I'd always had dancers from all kinds of ethnic backgrounds. I always loved that. I thought that was New York City, that was America. This cross-pollination, again, of cultures was really who we were, so I should represent that. And so it was kind of disconcerting to come back and see that that's what the world had turned into.
It's, you have to know about Carol, and maybe I'll just say that often when we walk together, I found myself somewhat playing the character of Martha Graham, I'll explain that, to her DeMille. And I'm thinking of a very famous moment when DeMille had just read the reviews for her Oklahoma, and they were the best reviews, but she thought it was the worst work she had done. And she was like, oh, I do not understand myself. I do not understand what's going on. I just want to leave. And Graham, and it's a very famous now printed talk, says, you know, artists, all great artists have a divine, I think she called it a queer dissatisfaction. Well, Carol is, you know, you get the impression here, the intellect, and certainly how she talked us through about 300 years of dance history, and now talking about jubilation. One of the most demanding, hard artists on herself, leaving the dance field, not liking her work. So I often found myself, no, Carol, this was good. Keep going, keep going.
No, I'm always quitting.
There was a moment when Carol left for Europe, and I'm interested in that moment. She had really enormous success in New York in terms of critical success. There were people seeing
Not how I perceived it.
her as a great hope for dance. And Carol, just almost at the height of that fervor, left for Europe. And she, I did mention James Baldwin earlier, but I can only think of a few major artists who truly left, and for their artistic life, left for Europe. Carol came back, which is an even more interesting perspective. Baldwin never got to do that. But I'm really interested in talking to you, and I think it's important for us to understand Carol's perspective on the artist and how she worked in Europe, and you began to talk about that.
Well, there were various facets to it. First, actually not the very first piece I did, no, but the second piece I did was immediate. You know, all the Europeans used to come to New York to see new dance, to find new ideas. That has long since disappeared. And they saw me, the second piece I did, and immediately brought me to many festivals. And suddenly, gosh, you have a real theater, and you know, you get to stay in a nice hotel. I mean, the absolute poverty in which we were operating, and which we didn't even realize, was very clear once it got to Europe. And there was a real, you know, you're right, there were some good reviews, but there was also so much controversy, and you know, I was so much a black sheep in some ways for betraying modern dance because I was bringing ballet influences and then destroying ballet because I'd been a ballet dancer. You know, so there was a lot of pressure, you know, in that way. Whereas in Europe, people just said, oh, this is, you know, it's normal. The history of art is, you know, it's evolving, and this is exciting, and they were just comfortable with it. Mm-hmm. And of course, this comes from different kind of traditions. I actually think partly it comes from the very simple fact that in the beginning, when Louis XIV was dancing around, the people weren't privileged to enjoy this. And when the revolution came, they demanded their rights to the arts, and the government funds it. And it's just considered to be one of the inalienable human rights to have access to the arts, and that the government should do it. Yes. Well, that's what I think. And so I was being offered more and more opportunities to just practice my craft as a choreographer, whereas in New York, you know, you're writing the grants, you're doing the administration, you know, I was performing, I was managing the dancers, I was choreographing, and I just felt like I was doing everything badly because you can't do that many things. I don't believe in multitasking. Actually, I'm somebody who really believes it takes all our faculties to really concentrate and do things well. And so, you know, the Paris Opera would say, come do a new ballet, work with any designer, any artist, any musician you want, and, and we'll pay for it. So I thought, this is the way I can really learn my craft. And so I did do that for many years, and that led to being asked to be the director of the Florence Ballet and many other situations.
You had work, I know, I just had the good fortune of working a month at a choreographic research center, one of 19 of them in France. And I know you worked in Nancy for quite a time.
5 or 6 years.
And these are Jack Lang, it was his vision in the 70s to decentralize culture outside of Paris, and enticed at that time the Parisian choreographers to go out to Lyon, to Angers, to 19 different points. And I know you had did you know Jack? I never asked if you knew Jack Lang and Michel Guy.
All of them, and they
So what were they like?
Very smart.
Good. And they were handsome too.
Yeah, they were. But they asked me to head one of these theaters, to create a dance company. But I was like 23 years old, and I was just like, I need to learn more. I'm not ready to. I just thought I needed more education as a choreographer and learning how to manage people, and I turned it down. Perhaps a huge mistake, because little did I know how hard it is to survive. But what happened was, yes, they created all these theaters, and they needed people like me who were doing kind of new, interesting things to run them. But gradually, they developed their own, choreographers, and they have become extremely interesting. There was a kind of vacant moment after World War II, I think, and it took a while to recover. But now the Europeans are doing incredibly interesting work. And it's an interesting thing to note that since World War II, all of American dance, I mean, not the big institutions like New York City Ballet or Boston Ballet, but everybody else from Cunningham, Graham, Paul Taylor, you name it, all the companies have been able to survive financially because we toured to Europe and the Europeans paid us well. Even a place like BAM, Brooklyn Academy of Music, they have this wonderful roster of performances, but who pays? It's the European governments. The European governments underwrite to bring most of the performances that take place, and no one talks about this, but you as an artist are barely paid when you go to BAM. So, I just decided for many years to, as I say, to learn by working in Europe, and to learn about history, to learn about the aesthetics. When I was directing the ballet in Florence, I was suddenly in the midst of the Guelphs and Ghibellines. I mean, so many people hated me because I was a woman and American. They'd never had anyone like that directing them, and there were so many little medieval manipulations against me, and false reports in the press. And so I read every word of Machiavelli. I mean, I had to learn to defend myself. And when in Greece, you're reading the Greek tragedy. It's been a great opportunity to learn so many things in a very direct way and to apply them in a very direct way. But I did, in 2004, I did kind of hit the wall with the European system, which is that the dancers are great, and they're very well trained, but you do not have this multilingual creativity that we have in New York, because people in New York, you do ballet, you do modern, you do street, you do kung fu, you do voguing. I mean, people are so multilingual, and they all are like different languages. And New York dancers who are willing to somehow pay the price to be that marginal outside of capitalism, outside of celebrity, and stick to dance because they love it so much, they just go even further than the great Europeans. And I just thought, it's time. I'm an American. I've been making all this work for 15 years. It's time for me to address my own culture and to work with these extraordinary American dancers. And so I refounded my company called Armitage Gone Dance in 2004. And we've had a wonderful, very, very creative time doing many, many new projects each year. But the economics are very challenging. Yes, it's nice to be at Radcliffe for a year.
Okay, so you're one of the few choreographers I know who have been through the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2010. What does, we have to ask one or two big questions. What does keep you elevated? Is there a thread that you've seen that we spoke about your dissatisfaction? In the work that I see an incredible desire to project and to give your dancers a direct energy out to the audience. It was great to see Carol at the Black Mountain College show the other day, and there was some essays of Charles Olson. They were called the projective verse essay, and a foot is to kick with. And Carol almost was jumping out of her skin. That's what I wanted. That's it. That's it. And it was all about that kind of energy that Olson was hoping to imbue at Black Mountain when he was the rector there. So I see that energy, and I also know of the struggle. What is that thread that keeps you elevated and in that mode?
There's something about choreography that is just really, really difficult because for some reason it seems to be the hardest art form. I mean, there's just way less good choreographers than any of the other art fields, and I just feel like it's taken me so long to figure out how to do what I had a kind of intuition that I wanted to do, and it just took, it's just taken 30 years to sort of figure it out. You have to understand costume and lighting and music and how to create processes, how to set patterns in motion, how to get over your habits and find new ways of moving. So I think I've just been driven by, that initial glimpse. Yeah.
I remember trying to get some people here in Boston to bring Merce Cunningham to Boston. And they said, well, we usually do emerging artists. And this was when Merce was 90. And I said, well, he really is an emerging artist. He's hipper than anyone on the block, and it's happening right now. And I think finally, in the Visual Arts Show Great in New York, there was a wonderful write-up of it by Holland Cotter, who said it was wonderful to see this intergenerational, and that emerging artist could be 70, 60, 50. It had nothing to do with age. So I'm hearing that sense of an emerging artist from you continually. I wonder, and maybe right before we open up for Q&A, because I think our time is out.
Yeah, pretty much.
Maybe it's even out already. I was going to ask, you're in the 2000, what has been called the human beings are dead, the capitalist passive machines are here. Where does dance fit in? I mean, when you were gone in the 90s, that invasion that we had of media into the home, much has shifted in your time as choreographing. Do you feel that shift? Are you searching for, okay, where does art interlock now, both with the politics and the social?
Yeah, it's a complicated question because it's really important to know yourself and to stay true to yourself, because that is really what people ultimately respond to, and they feel that truth somehow, or that honesty. At the same time, of course, you have to adapt to changing times. I mean, artists always have had to do this. And we are in a very peculiar moment with the internet, with people, young people are very much used to getting things on demand and not, having to show up at a certain time, at a certain place to do something. And I think the performing arts are having a very hard time. Certainly in New York they are. Audiences have dwindled considerably, and this is everyone from the Metropolitan Opera, all the way across spectrums. And I don't think anyone really knows what the answer is to keeping audiences, but inevitably, I mean, dance has always been here. It is just such a natural function. It will remain, and I tend to think again, the coldness of this media will get to people, and the communal sharing of experience and having a dialogue hopefully will be something people want to do. Hopefully we'll know that that opportunity even exists. But yeah, it's a moment of searching, for sure now, how to find the way.
I think we're at the end of our time, and I want to ask you to join me in thanking Carol and Richard for a very stimulating afternoon.